Kuhuk. She had everything until betrayal tore it all away, stripped of her name, her home, and her future. Evelyn Hartwell was sold on an auction block in lawless Tombstone. One stranger's bid gave her a chance at freedom, but that chance would pull her into a world of fire, lies, and deadly men wearing stolen badges. Before it was over, she'd confront the man who ruined her and decide if justice was worth her life. The sky above Tombstone that afternoon was a color you couldn't name, part gold, part brass, part the hard glare of August sun, the kind of sky that bleached bones and baked truth out of a man. Heat lay over the town like a heavy quilt, smothering breath and temper alike. It was the sort they'd cleared a space in the dusty center of town, just in front of the post office and across from Boone's Silver Ace Saloon. A rough plank platform had been dragged out, and on it stood Evelyn Hartwell, her bare feet pressed to the splintered boards, her back straight, despite the tremor in her knees. She was 24, the only daughter of a man somewhere in the crowd. Someone spat, boots shifted, spurs jangled. A man's laugh rose high and cracked before it was swallowed by the heat. There were miners here, and cowhands, and a few ranchers with weathered faces. Most had that lean, wary look of men who'd learned the West never gave more than it took. The auctioneer, a narrow-shouldered fellow in a wilted bowler hat, cleared his throat and read from a crumpled sheet. Evelyn Hartwell, of Charleston, South Carolina, educated, can read and write, debt of $300 owed to McGill and Company, inherited from her late father, auction to settle, said debt. Who'll start me? The words fell like stones into a dry well. A man near the front, his shirt sticking dark to his back, smirked. 300. She looks like she'd break trying to carry a bucket of water. I'll give you $20 for the trouble. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Evelyn kept her chin high. If they saw her cry, they'd think they were right, and maybe they were. A year ago, she'd been walking beneath gaslights on Charleston's King Street, her gloved hand tucked in her father's arm. Now the silk gloves were gone. The arm was gone, and all she had left was a tarnished silver locket hidden at her throat. The laughter died when a voice from the saloon porch spoke up smooth, lazy, but edged like a knife. $50. It was Silas Boone himself, broad-shouldered and wearing that dark vest embroidered with a gambler's roses. The sunlight caught on the gold tooth in his grin. Folks said Boone could buy anything he wanted in Tombstone land. Cattle, men's silence, and he had a taste for acquiring things the law looked away from. The auctioneer bobbed his head, relieved to have a real bid. 50 for Mr. Boone. Do I hear 60? Evelyn's stomach tightened. She didn't know every detail of Boone's reputation, but she'd seen enough in the way his saloon girls stood painted faces, hiding hollow eyes, to know she'd rather die than work under his roof. A pause. Then another voice came, low and even, from the far side of the square. 100. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't loud, yet the sound of it carried clean across the open space. Heads turned. The speaker was a tall man standing beside a chestnut mare, hat brim shadowing his eyes. He looked to be in his 40s, the kind of man who'd seen his share of bad weather and worse luck but was still standing. Plain work shirt rolled at the sleeves, dust on his boots, the kind of dust that came from honest land. Boone's smile didn't shift, but the gold tooth flashed again. 150, he said. The tall man's answer came without hurry. 200. Whispers stirred. $200 was no small sum here, enough to buy winter feed, a pair of good mules, or an acre with water rights. Who in his right mind would put it down on a woman who'd plainly never worked a day west of the Mississippi? Boone pushed away from the porch railing. 275. Evelyn found herself meeting the stranger's gaze for the first time. Even from across the square, she felt the steadiness in it. Not pity, never pity, but a weighing, as if he were trying to decide whether she could be worth the trouble. 300, he said. The gavel came down with a crack. The deal was struck. A sound ran through the crowd, part to surprise, part something darker. The stranger handed over a pouch that clinked heavy in the auctioneer's palm. then crossed the distance to the platform. Up close, Evelyn saw lines at the corners of his eyes, sun-browned skin, and a small scar along his jaw. He offered his hand. "Name's Miles Carver. I've got a ranch out at Coyote Creek. Needs tending, cooking, cleaning, keeping the hens in line. I'll pay you fair wages. You stay as long as you want, or you go when you're ready. That's up to you." For a moment, she couldn't move. The platform felt higher than it was, the distance to the ground greater. No man had offered her a choice in months, not since her father's heart failed in that mining camp north of Bisbee, not since the debts came due. She took his hand. The grip was strong, warm, and it pulled her down from the boards onto the street. They'd taken no more than 3 steps before Boone's shadow fell across them. He tipped his hat, eyes cold beneath the brim. "Enjoy your purchase, Carver, but don't think you've won. This ain't over." Miles didn't break stride, but Evelyn could feel the tightness in the hand that held her steady as they reached his mare. She swung up behind him, clutching the saddle horn as he clicked to the horse. The town slid away behind them, the sound of boots and voices fading into the heat. Evelyn let herself glance back once. Boone still stood there, Goldtooth catching the last hard light, his smile promising a debt of his own. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling the thin metal warm against her skin. Inside was the folded scrap her father had pressed into her hand the night before he died. A rough map, lines drawn in his clumsy hand, marking a point somewhere deep in the mountains. He'd told her it might be worth something someday. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe it was just a bit of foolish hope to leave her with. But as the horse carried her out onto the open trail, with the whole of the high desert spreading before them, Evelyn decided she'd hold on to it. She didn't know where Miles Carver's road would lead, or if Boone's shadow would follow them into whatever lay ahead. But she knew this. She was leaving the auction block behind, and sometimes that was enough to begin again. The trail away from Tombstone wound through sunburnt hills and dry creek beds, the dust rising behind Miles Carver's chestnut mare in a pale ribbon that hung in the hot air. Evelyn Hartwell sat behind him, her hands light on the saddle horn, the sway of the horse both strange and oddly soothing. She hadn't ridden since she was a child, and never in country, like this country that seemed to roll on forever, empty and full at once. They rode in silence for a time. Miles wasn't a man to waste words, and Evelyn was too busy keeping her seat to press conversation. Now and then, the mare's ears flicked toward the sound of a grasshopper's leap or the rustle of brush in the wind. It was the kind of quiet that let thoughts wander back to Charleston, to her father's last days, to the auction block she'd just left behind. The land began to rise, the trail narrowing between walls of red rock. Shadows stretched long as the afternoon waned, painting the stone in deeper shades of rust and violet. Ahead, a small herd of wild mustangs grazed in a shallow draw. One lifted its head, dark mane falling back, nostrils flaring at the scent of strangers. It didn't bolt, it simply watched, bold and still, the way a creature does when it has never belonged to anyone. Evelyn felt that gaze long after they had passed. "Ever done much riding?" Miles asked suddenly, his voice carrying easily over the creak of leather. "Not enough to claim I can," she admitted. "Then we'll take it easy. No sense rushing a thing worth learning." His tone was even, almost casual, but there was an undertone to it, patient, steady, that eased the tightness in her chest. By the time they topped the next ridge, the sun was a low burn along the horizon. Below them lay a wide valley, green with cottonwoods and willows tracing the curve of a creek. A small cabin stood near the water, smoke curling from its chimney. Beside it was a modest barn and a corral, with cattle scattered in the fading light. "This is Coyote Creek Ranch," Miles said. "Not much to look at, but it keeps me." When he swung down and offered her a hand, she took it. Stepping onto solid earth, after weeks of travel and uncertainty, she hadn't realized how badly she needed to feel ground that wasn't shifting under her feet. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar smoke. The main room was simple, a stone fireplace, a sturdy table, Shelves lined with tin mugs and worn books. Everything showed the marks of long use and care. "You'll take the East Room," Miles said, opening a door onto a small space where a bed stood neatly made beneath a faded quilt. A row of carved wooden toys sat on a shelf beside well-thumbed adventure novels. "My boy, Thomas, stayed here," he said quietly. "Fever took him at 8. My wife passed a week later." Evelyn's hand hovered over one of the carved horses, the wood smooth from years of handling. She set it back gently. "I'm sorry. We all lose someone," he replied. "It's what we do after that matters." The days that followed were hard in a way Evelyn had never known. Morning began before the sun. With chickens to feed and eggs to gather, buckets of water had to be carried from the creek, the cold biting into her hands. Her first biscuits were a disaster, black on the bottom, raw in the middle, but Miles ate them without complaint. In the afternoons, she worked a small garden plot by the cabin, pulling weeds and checking the beans her father had planted weeks before his death. The work left her sore, but there was satisfaction in seeing green shoots pushing up through the soil. It felt like proof that something could grow again, even in hard ground. At night, she found an old leather-bound journal in a trunk and began to write letters she would never send, recording each small step forward. "Today, I carried the buckets without spilling. Today, I baked bread that rose. Today, I mended a shirt sleeve without ruining it." The words were a quiet defense against the voice inside her that still whispered she wasn't made for this life. One evening, Miles saddled the chestnut mare and told her, "Time you learned to ride proper." They spent hours in the corral, the winter stars sharp above them. "Sit deep, heels down. Look where you're going," he said. The first few laps were clumsy, but gradually the mare's rhythm began to match her own. By the time they stopped, her legs ached, but she was grinning like a child. She began to see the kind of man Miles was, not quick to speak, but steady and careful with what he promised. When something went wrong, as it always did on a ranch, he didn't curse or blame. He simply fixed what needed fixing. It was a kind of strength that didn't shout but held its ground. Still, there were moments when she caught him scanning the ridgeline, eyes narrowed, as if expecting a rider to appear. And when they went into Tombstone for supplies, she felt the weight of certain stares, heard the whispers that quieted when she passed. Boone's parting words, "This ain't over," echoed in the back of her mind like a low drum. But each day at Coyote Creek, she felt the shape of herself changing. Her hands grew stronger, her back straighter. She could carry more, do more, breathe easier in the thin, dry air. She still wore the silver locket at her throat, the map inside it a mystery she hadn't yet dared to solve. Sometimes, late in the evening, she would step onto the porch and watch the light fade over the valley, the cottonwoods whispering in the breeze. The place had a way of settling into her bones. Quiet but sure, it didn't erase the past, but it gave her a reason to think beyond it. She didn't yet call it home, but the word was beginning to form in her mind. And that, she thought, was a start. The night the fire came was a night that should have been peaceful. The sky was clear, the air still, the cattle quiet in their pens. Evelyn Hartwell had gone to bed early, the day's work in the garden and chicken yard leaving her pleasantly tired. But she woke with a start to the sharp, unnatural crackle of flames. It wasn't the soft pop of the fireplace, this was a hungry, roaring sound, and it was close. She was halfway to the door when Miles' voice cut through the darkness, urgent and loud. "Evelyn, get to the barn." Smoke hung heavy in the air, stinging her eyes and coating her tongue with a taste like scorched metal. She ran, boots pounding the dirt, her breath already coming hard. The barn's roof was rimmed in orange, flames licking upward into the night. Sparks drifted high, carried on invisible currents. The dry scent of hay was turning to something acrid and deadly. "Get the foal," Miles shouted, already working the bucket line with Tom Ridley and 2 other neighbors who must have seen the glow from their places up the valley. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She plunged into the thick, choking heat of the barn. The foal was in the last stall, eyes wide with panic, hooves striking the boards. Evelyn's heart hammered as she fumbled with the halter, murmuring nonsense to calm them both. "Easy now, easy." The animal reared, the whites of its eyes flashing, but she held on. When the rope was secure, she pulled with all her strength, coaxing, urging, until the foal burst into the open air with her. She led it toward the corral, her legs trembling with the effort, then turned back toward the barn without thinking. She grabbed a bucket from the line, passed by calloused hands slick with sweat, and threw water where the flames were biting into the wall. The fire hissed, but only seemed to grow more furious. The heat rolled over her in waves, each one hotter than the last. They worked for what felt like hours, though later she'd realize it had been less than 2. At last the wind shifted, carrying the flames back toward what had already burned. The barn's frame sagged and collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks into the black sky. It was over. Evelyn dropped her bucket and sank to her knees in the dirt, gasping for breath. Her hair clung damp to her forehead. Her arms felt like lead. The palms of her hands were raw. Miles came to sit beside her, his own shirt soaked through and streaked with soot. "You did good tonight," he said simply. It was only then she realized what she'd done, how she'd run toward the danger without thinking, how she'd fought beside him and the neighbors like she belonged there. Something inside her shifted at the thought, but even in that moment of hard-won survival, she could see the worry in Miles's eyes. Tom Ridley confirmed it, standing there in the cooling night, his hat in his hands. The older man said, "This wasn't no accident, no lightning, no lantern left burning. Someone set this." There was no need to say the name. Evelyn felt it in the pit of her stomach. Boone. In the days that followed, the smell of smoke lingered over Coyote Creek like a warning. They salvaged what they could from the ruins, stacked the blackened boards that might still serve as firewood. The foal, unharmed but skittish, stayed close to the corral, and in town, the whispers started. Evelyn could feel them following her down the boardwalk. Quiet words that carried just enough for her to catch fragments. Charleston, embezzlement, $5,000. She had known the rumor would surface eventually, but knowing didn't soften the blow. By the 3rd day, she decided she would tell Miles herself. They sat on the porch that evening, the sound of the creek filling the silence. She told him about Daniel Whitford, the man she had been engaged to marry. The man who had stolen from his father's shipping company and blamed her when she tried to stop him. How he had made the lies stick. How she and her father had run west to start over, only for her father to die before they could. When she was done, she stared out into the gathering dark, expecting him to see her differently. But Miles only said, "Truth's not always what the world sees. Boone will use any lie he can, but will face it when it comes." His calm was a balm, but she couldn't quite share it. In the shadows beyond the porch, the night felt full of unseen eyes. She thought of Boone's promise, "This ain't over," and believed him. A week after the fire, she went into Tombstone with Miles for supplies. The air in town was different, thicker somehow, as if the people had caught the scent of trouble and didn't want it near. The storekeeper, Sir Collins, served them quickly but kept glancing toward the window. Finally, in a voice low enough that it was almost a whisper, he said, "Boone's been asking questions. About you, about Charleston, about your father." The words settled over her like fresh ash. "What kind of questions?" Miles asked. "Questions a man asks when he's looking to ruin someone." On the ride back, Evelyn thought about telling Miles she should leave, that if she were gone, Boone would have no reason to come after him or the ranch. But when she opened her mouth, he cut her off. "Running won't help. Men like Boone feed on fear. Show them you're scared, and they'll chase you to the ends of the earth." His confidence was solid as the hills around them, but she felt the earth under her shift. The fire had been a message, and she knew Boone had more to say. That night, she woke to the sound of the wind pushing against the cabin walls, and for a moment she thought it was the roar of flames again. But the darkness held, and the only light came from the faint glow of embers in the hearth. Still, she lay awake, listening to every creak of the timbers, every rustle outside, wondering if it was Boone's men walking the edges of the property. In the morning, the sun rose over a ranch that smelled of smoke and uncertainty. The barn would be rebuilt. The foal would grow and run. But the sense of safety Evelyn had started to feel here had been scorched, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the next fire wouldn't be meant for the barn at all. And somewhere, in the shadows of Tombstone saloons, Boone was smiling that gold-toothed smile, thinking of what he would take from her next. The storm came in from the north like a living thing howling through the cottonwoods, piling snow against the cabin walls until the windows rattled in their frames. For 2 days, Miles and Evelyn had been shut in together, tending the fire, breaking ice in the water troughs, and keeping the livestock from freezing in the bitter wind. On the third evening, when the snow lay waist-deep in the yard and the clouds pressed so low it felt as if the sky itself had sunk to the valley floor, a pounding came at the door. Miles was on his feet at once, rifle in hand, and Evelyn felt her heart leap into her throat. Few men would ride into this valley in such weather unless they had desperate cause or dangerous intentions. When Miles threw open the door, a figure half buried in snow stumbled forward. Henry Adams, the town physician, sagged against the frame, his beard white with frost, his hands raw from the cold. They got him to the fire, stripped off his frozen coat, and wrapped him in blankets until the color returned to his cheeks. "They're coming for you, Evelyn," he said without preamble. 3 men rode into Tombstone this morning, calling themselves U.S. Marshals, asking after a woman named Hartwell, asking a lot of questions about Coyote Creek. The words hung in the warm air like ice. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She had been expecting Boone's next move, but not this soon. Not in the middle of a storm. Miles frowned. Real marshals wouldn't push through weather like this for an embezzlement case. Not unless there's more to it. "That's exactly my thought," Adams said. "They carry badges, but I've seen badges bought for less than a good horse. My guess, Boone or that man from Charleston you told me about sent them." Evelyn's thoughts flew at once to Daniel Whitford. She could almost see his smirk, hear the smooth drawl he used to hide his lies. He would not care if she froze to death on the ride back east. In fact, he might prefer it. The wind rattled the shutters. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. Miles glanced at her, then at Adams. "We make ready. If they're here on false authority, we'll prove it. If they're hired guns, we'll send them packing." By dawn, the storm had eased, though drifts still lay thick across the yard. The 3 men rode in single file up the trail, their horses blowing steam into the cold air. The leader was tall and broad-shouldered, his badge catching the weak morning light. The second was a heavy-set man with a black beard. The third was younger than the rest, barely more than a boy, and he kept glancing around as if unsure he wanted to be there at all. Miles stepped out onto the porch, rifle easy in his hands but ready. "Morning. State your business." The leader's voice was hard. "We're here for Evelyn Hartwell, wanted in Charleston for embezzlement. Step aside." Evelyn moved into view before Miles could speak. "If you're real marshals, you'll have papers, signed by a judge." "Let me see them." The leader's mouth twisted. "We don't need to prove a thing to you." "That's where you're wrong," Miles said. "This is my land, and no one takes a soul off it without proper authority. Show the papers or turn around." The young one shifted in his saddle. "Crawford, maybe we ought to—" "Quiet, Jimmy," the bearded man growled. Evelyn stepped off the porch, the cold biting through her boots, her eyes on the leader. "Who paid you to come here?" she asked. Was it Boone or Daniel Whitford? The question landed like a thrown stone. The bearded man's gaze flickered, just for a second. The young one looked down at his reins. The leader's jaw clenched. "You've got no idea what you're talking about," he said. "I know enough," she replied. "Enough to see you've got no warrant, which means you've got no right to be here." Jimmy suddenly reined his horse around. "I didn't sign on for a lynching," he muttered. "Find yourself another fool." And just like that, he was riding back down the trail. 2 against 3 had been dangerous odds. 2 against 2 felt different. You can ride out like your friend, Miles said evenly. Or you can keep pushing and find out how fast a man can get from here to the real Marshal in Prescott with news of impersonators wearing government tin. The bearded man looked to his leader. The leader's hand twitched toward his gun. For a heartbeat, the air was knife-sharp with the question of whether they'd all survive the next second. Then he cursed low under his breath, wheeled his horse, and kicked it hard toward the trail. The bearded man followed. Evelyn stood there, breath steaming in the cold, watching them go until they vanished into the white glare of the snowfield. Only then did she let herself exhale. "They'll be back," she said softly. Miles nodded. "Maybe. But next time, we'll be ready." It was a morning so bright it hurt the eyes. The kind of morning when the air smells of damp earth and new grass, when the world seems to have forgotten winter's bite. The cottonwoods along Coyote Creek shimmered with fresh leaves. The rebuilt barn stood proud in the sunlight, and the fields promised a summer of good harvest. Yet Evelyn Hartwell's heart carried a weight she could not shake. The wedding was only days away, and though she should have felt nothing but joy, she'd learned enough in her time out west to know that peace could be a fragile thing. She was setting bread to rise when the knock came 3 firm raps, the kind that carried purpose. Wiping her hands on her apron, she opened the door to find a woman standing on the porch, tall and straight despite the miles she must have traveled. Her hair was silver, pinned neatly beneath a traveling hat, and her eyes were clear and assessing. "My name is Margaret Whitford," the woman said. "I believe you once knew my son, Daniel." Evelyn's fingers tightened on the edge of the doorframe. Of all the faces she had expected to see, this one was not among them. "Yes," she said carefully. Margaret stepped inside when invited, removing her gloves with deliberate calm. "I came here to do 2 things," she said. "First, to tell you I am sorry for the harm my son caused you, for the lies he told, and for the danger he put you in. Second, to bring you something I believe belongs to you." From her traveling bag, she drew a leather folder and placed it on the table. Inside were documents, bank ledgers, statements, and, most astonishingly, a signed confession in Daniel's own hand. The words were plain. He admitted to the theft, to framing Evelyn, to letting her life burn while he walked away untouched. Evelyn sat down hard, the air rushing out of her. For so long, she had dreamed of proof, of something to clear her name. Now it lay before her in black ink. "The governor of South Carolina has issued you a full pardon," Margaret said. "Daniel tried to steal from the wrong man this time. The law caught him, and when pressed, he told the truth, at least enough of it. There was more." Margaret set a small velvet box beside the folder. "These pearls belonged to my mother. They were meant for Daniel's bride. But I believe you will honor them more than he ever could." Evelyn touched the pearls, the cool weight of them a shock against her fingertips. They were beautiful, but more than that, they felt like a closing of a chapter she had been trapped in for too long. "Why?" Evelyn asked finally. "Why bring this to me yourself?" Margaret's gaze did not waver. "Because a woman's reputation is her life, and I would not have mine stolen without a fight. I failed to protect you before. I will not fail now." Through the window, Evelyn could see Miles outside, laughing with neighbors as they set up tables for the wedding feast. The sight of him steady, sure, unshaken by all they had faced, brought a tightness to her throat. "You have good people here," Margaret said quietly. "Treasure them. You were never the woman my son called you. You have always been worth more than he could see." When Margaret left, the sun was higher, the shadows shorter, but the air inside the cabin felt transformed. Evelyn stood for a long time with her hands on the table, the confession and the pearls before her, letting the truth settle into her bones. The wedding day came with clear skies and a soft breeze. The valley was alive with color, wild flowers blooming along the creek, their scent carried on the air. Evelyn wore the pearls, the silver locket at her throat, and a dress she had sewn herself in the quiet evenings after supper. As she walked toward Miles, The gathered friends fell silent. She saw pride in their eyes, and something else belief that she belonged here, that she had earned her place among them, not by chance or purchase, but by the work of her own hands and the truth she had fought to reclaim. When Miles took her hand, the warmth of his grip was more certain than any promise spoken aloud. They said their vows with the mountains standing witness, the creek running strong beside them, and the future stretching wide as the desert beyond. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, the quiet deep. Boone's shadow no longer loomed in her mind. Daniel's lies had been buried under the weight of his own confession. She had been bought once, in a dusty square under the eyes of strangers, but she had walked her own road since, and in the end, she had not been claimed by any man's coin. She was Evelyn Carver now, by her own choice, and the life before her was hers alone. Evelyn Hartwell's story began under the blistering Arizona sun, on a day when the streets of Tombstone shimmered with heat and the air carried the scent of dust and sweat. Once the daughter of a respected businessman in Charleston, she had been reduced to a name on a debt sheet after her father's sudden death. Standing barefoot on an auction block, facing the appraising eyes of strangers, she was moments away from losing the last piece of her freedom. Then Miles Carver stepped forward steady, deliberate, and unwilling to let her life be bargained away. With a single bid, he changed the course of her fate. At Coyote Creek Ranch, Evelyn's life began to take shape in ways she could never have imagined. The work was hard feeding chickens, hauling water, tending a small garden, but each task gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Miles didn't treat her as fragile or helpless. He gave her responsibility and the space to grow into it. The ranch became more than shelter. It became the ground where she rebuilt herself, piece by piece. But the West had its shadows. The fire that consumed the barn wasn't an accident. It was a message from Boone, the saloon owner who had his eyes on her from the day of the auction. His threats came in different forms. Rumors whispered in town. False lawmen arriving at the ranch. The weight of her past in Charleston resurfacing like a bad dream. Each time, Evelyn refused to bend. She had learned to stand tall in a world that often tried to keep her small. The turning point came when Margaret Whitford, the mother of the man who had framed her, arrived at the ranch. In her hands was the truth, a signed confession from her son, Daniel, admitting to the theft and the lies that had followed. Along with it came a pardon from the governor of South Carolina, erasing the false accusations that had haunted her. For the first time since leaving Charleston, Evelyn's name was her own again, untarnished. Her wedding to Miles was simple, but it was everything she needed. Beneath a wide western sky, surrounded by neighbors who had become family, she said her vows wearing the pearls Margaret had given her, and the silver locket she had carried through every trial. The words they spoke were not just promises of love, but of partnership and resilience, a commitment to walk side by side, no matter the road ahead. By nightfall, Evelyn understood that she had crossed an invisible threshold. She was no longer a woman defined by her debts, her losses, or the lies told about her. She was Evelyn Carver, by choice, and her future was hers to shape. The heart of Evelyn's journey is a truth that reaches far beyond the Old West. Life will put you in places where you feel powerless, where others try to decide your worth. It might come in the form of betrayal, injustice, or sudden loss, but those moments do not define you. Your response to them does. Evelyn's life changed because she chose to keep moving forward, to work with her own hands, to meet each challenge with quiet determination. Today, we may face different trials, but the lesson remains the same. You may be standing on your own kind of auction block, trapped in a job that drains you, stuck in a relationship that diminishes you, or carrying the weight of someone else's lies. Like Evelyn, you have a choice: to let that moment define you, or to take the first step toward reclaiming your life. It won't be easy. There will be boons in your path. People who want to control you, silence you, or make you believe you're worth less than you are. But there will also be allies, like Miles and Margaret, who will stand with you when you choose to stand for yourself. Evelyn's story is not just about survival, it's about ownership. Ownership of your choices, your voice, and your future. She teaches us that starting over is not about erasing the past, but about building something stronger on the ground it left behind. If her journey has sparked something in you, if it's reminded you of your own resilience, or encouraged you to take that next brave step, then let's keep writing together. Subscribe to this channel, share these stories, and help keep the spirit of courage, justice, and second chances alive. Every click, every view, every share keeps these tales of the West breathing in the modern world. So saddle up, hit that subscribe button, and join me for the next legend waiting to be told.